My name is Michelle Burlingame, and it's my very great pleasure to introduce to you Ari Hogenboom, who is in effect a kind of spiritual brother. Ari was David Herbert Donald's first PhD student, and I was a PhD student under David Donald later. And I first got to know Ari back toward the tag end of the Second Punic War, when we were both working at the Library of Congress, and had the pleasure of dining with him regularly at lunchtime. And on February 12th, 1966, my graduate school roommate, Peter Colchin, who, as some of you may know, is a very distinguished historian of slavery, and I gave a Lincoln's birthday party. And we invited Ari, who came, and his lovely wife, Olive, and we invited David Donald. This was in Baltimore. And it was quite a memorable event, made particularly memorable by Ari's singing of "O God, Our Help in Ages Past" while standing on his head. A mighty fortress is our God. Well, what the heck? He's being a pedant. What can I tell you? The upshot was that we lost our lease. Ari has published many books, starting with Outlawing the Spoils, which was his doctoral dissertation on the history of the civil service reform movement, and he went on to become and is widely recognized as a premier scholar of this Gilded Age period after Reconstruction, before the turn of the century. But he, at the time that I got to know him, was working on Gustavus Fox, who was Lincoln's Assistant Secretary of the Navy and a very close friend of Lincoln's. And Ari has recently published an excellent biography of Gustavus Fox, and he will now be sharing with us some of the findings that he reached in that book. So please join me in welcoming Ari Hogenboom.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I don't know exactly what to say after that. But I have known Mike for many years, and I do say, we have just, my wife and I recently purchased his monumental, massive biography of Lincoln, and don't be put off by its size. It's very, very readable. You can just simply open it up to a part that you like, that you're interested in. You will find fascinating information within. And so, Mike, you've really done us proud. Your friends have done us proud with that great biography. Having convinced his parents that he was suited neither for the ministry nor the law, Gustavus Vasa Fox realized his dream in 1838 and became a midshipman in the U.S. Navy. He proved to be an able officer, and by the late 1850s was on leave to skipper U.S. mail steamers. But he resigned from the Navy and became a manager of a textile mill in 1855 to marry Virginia Woodbury. The daughter of a Supreme Court justice, she was the sister-in-law of Montgomery Blair, who would become Lincoln's Postmaster General and would urge Lincoln to appoint Fox as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. In that position, he was, in effect, Chief of Naval Operations during the Civil War. Prior to his inauguration, Lincoln had not met Fox, but Fox had conceived a plan to relieve Fort Sumter in the harbor entrance of Charleston, South Carolina, which Montgomery Blair pushed and which Lincoln ultimately adopted. Overcoming a variety of obstacles, Fox's expedition to provision Sumter got underway, but its objective prompted Confederates to open fire on Sumter and begin the Civil War. Bad weather and the detachment of his most powerful vessel, the Powhatan, prevented a frustrated Fox from reinforcing the fort prior to its surrender, and all he could do was evacuate its garrison. On that level, the expedition failed. But Lincoln's adroitness and the rashness of Southerners led them to fire on bread and united the North as nothing else could have done. Fox was chagrined, but he had earned Lincoln's confidence and friendship. Lincoln wrote, "I most cheerfully and truly declare that the failure of the undertaking has not lowered you a particle, while the qualities you developed in the effort have greatly heightened you in my estimation. For a daring and dangerous enterprise of a similar character, you would today be the man of all my acquaintances whom I would select. You and I both anticipated that the cause of the country would be advanced by making the attempt to provision Fort Sumter, even if it should fail. And it is of no small consolation now to feel that our anticipation is justified by the result. The enterprise that Lincoln soon had in mind for Fox was not daring and dangerous, but was extremely important. Gideon Welles headed the Department of the Navy, which comprised several bureaus led either by career naval officers or civil servants. Welles was an excellent administrator, and the bureau chiefs were competent but traditionally minded. Welles had the power to make decisions concerning strategy, commanders, ships, guns, and armor, but had no one with sufficient expertise to digest information, resolve conflicting ideas, and create a huge navy overnight for a blockade the length of which the world had never seen. Hasn't seen one like it since either, I might add. Lincoln decided that Fox was just the man Welles needed to coordinate naval operations. Welles demurred, but Lincoln insisted. I understand that there is some opposition to the appointment of Captain G.V. Fox. My wish and advice is that you do not allow any ordinary obstacle prevent his appointment. He is a live man whose services we cannot well dispense with. After spending a half day with Fox, Welles realized Lincoln was right. Welles and Fox proved to be a remarkably balanced team. Welles was knowledgeable and shrewd. Fox was impulsive, energetic, enthusiastic, and gregarious. A Navy Department colleague observed, "He has a gigantic capacity for work and makes all difficulties yield before him." Fox freely advised Lincoln, who respected his judgment. The President, Captain Samuel Francis DuPont, reported on 26 July 1861, has been told up and down by Mr. Fox that the blockading squadron cannot keep at sea in the winter without coaling stations. On 1 October 1861, at a crucial conference, Fox convinced Lincoln, as well as William H. Seward, Simon Cameron, and George B. McClellan, that a costly armada to establish a naval base at Port Royal, South Carolina, was essential for the blockade. A month later, in November, when Charles Wilkes rashly seized Confederate commissioners James Mason and John Slidell from the British mail steamer Trent, Fox informed Lincoln of the limitations of the American Navy. Informal Westerner that he was, Lincoln dropped in at Blair House, Montgomery Blair's residence, to see Fox and made himself at home. He distorts his features terribly, Virginia Fox observed on 12 November, and throws himself about promiscuously. Before she and her sister Minna brought in tea, Gus said he had been full length on the sofa. Although Lincoln seemed in no hurry to resolve the crisis, Fox convinced him that the superior British Navy could accomplish a major Southern objective and destroy the Union blockade in a month, and that Mason and Slidell would have to be released. On Christmas Day, Fox and Gus and Virginia Fox, the Blairs, and other guests enjoyed a plain but agreeable dinner at the White House. Later, Lincoln met with the cabinet and decided that the prisoners should be given up. On New Year's Day, at the small, quiet port of Provincetown, Massachusetts, selected by Fox to avoid any popular excitement, Mason and Slidell boarded Her Majesty's ship Rinaldo. Lincoln's faith in Fox annoyed Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton. He, that is Lincoln, leans to the judgment of Mr. Fox, who he seems to think is in possession of the entire amount of knowledge in the naval world. Well, Lincoln did lean on Fox for his naval expertise, and a constant refrain in Virginia Fox's Civil War diary is the President sent for Fox. But Lincoln wanted Fox to be with him because he valued his company as much as, or perhaps more than, his knowledge of the naval world. Cheerful, amusing, and optimistic, Fox was also an excellent storyteller, and like Lincoln, knew when and how to use a good yarn. Lincoln's secretary, John Hay, a great raconteur, often in Fox's company, recorded that on one evening at James Wormley's hotel, Fox was more than unusually funny as he told of the delightful usages of society on the coast of Africa, where, when you dine with a native prince, the etiquette is to appear naked. He says that one of his brother officers once made a present to a native king of a cocked hat, a green velvet waistcoat, and a skillet. On dining with him the next day, the grateful host appeared in the cocked hat with the flaps drawn down like elephant's ears over his chops, the green velvet waistcoat pulled to bursting over his stomach, the second button left open to display his umbilical development, his testicles stored in the skillet, and his male organ fastened to its handle. The skillet being moored about his loins by cowhide thongs. Now, understandably, Lincoln, with his earthy sense of humor, enjoyed Fox's company. Lincoln liked Fox's presence at all times, but especially wanted him around in times of stress. Exasperated with McClellan's inaction in early March 1862, Lincoln, with his other secretary, John G. Nicolay, called on the Foxes, but discovered Gus was out consulting with Wells. While awaiting the return of Fox, whom Nicolay was seeking, Lincoln could not contain himself and said to Virginia, "I'll tell you how things are. State a proposition to you. Suppose a man whose profession it is to understand military matters is asked how long it will take him and what he requires to accomplish certain things. And when he has had all he asked and the time comes, he does nothing. There has been an immense quantity of money spent on our army here on the Potomac, and there is nothing done. The country and Congress and everyone is anxious and excited about it." A few days later, when news of the devastation wreaked by the Confederate ironclad Virginia at Hampton Roads nearly panicked the cabinet, I might add, Edwin M. Stanton was the most panicked of all of them, Lincoln was, Wells reported, delighted that Fox had arrived at Hampton Roads. He was just in time to witness the epic battle between the Monitor and Virginia. Fox became an ardent advocate of the Monitor-type ironclad, armed with a 15-inch gun, to give it offensive punch, and Lincoln, Wells, Congress, and the people followed his lead. It was to be expected that Lincoln would call on and call for Fox on naval matters, since he was de facto chief of naval operations. But often Lincoln wanted Fox with him as a companion. When Joe Hooker's Army of the Potomac crossed the Rappahannock River in late April 1863 and occupied a position near Chancellorsville, the campaign had opened auspiciously, but Lincoln, schooled by previous disappointments, closely monitored developments. On 1st and 2nd May, Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson attacked and drove back Hooker's army. As he often did when distressed by military reverses, Lincoln on Sunday, 3rd of May, called on Fox. Together, they stayed at the War Department telegraph office until 11 p.m. Sunday evening and left hoping Hooker at Chancellorsville and John Sedgwick at Fredericksburg had Lee's army in a vice. Rather than press forward as Lincoln hoped, Hooker fell back and on 4 to 6 May recrossed the Rappahannock. Intelligence from Richmond papers gave Lincoln hope on 6 May that Hooker if Hooker would seize the offensive, victory might yet be won. Since a storm had cut telegraph communications, Lincoln sent Fox to Hooker with the newspapers and his personal message, "Stick to them, I'm with you." Fox found Hooker cool, clear, and satisfied, but not about to stick to Lee, all of which left Lincoln just disgusted. Hooker's promise to resume the offensive put Lincoln in a sufficiently better mood to regale Fox with some of the amusing taunts of pickets across the Rappahannock. The Rebs call out, "Yanks, gonna take Richmond?" Yank replied, "What makes you dress so poorly?" Reb answers, "We don't put on our best clothes to kill hogs." This is really interesting. Lincoln would tell this story. I mean, continuing to enjoy Fox's company in the fall of 1863, Lincoln came over one evening with a musket on his shoulder and invited Fox to shoot with him and Assistant Secretary of War Peter H. Watson. In the shooting match, as probably the musket was a Spencer repeating rifle, Lincoln was second to Watson, and Fox proved to be the poorest shot. In early May 1864, Grant, attempting to get around Lee's right, crossed the Rapidan River, advanced into the wilderness of Virginia, and on the 5th and 6th of May encountered stiff resistance in the bloody Battle of the Wilderness. Full of anxiety, Lincoln on 6th of May dropped in on Fox at the Navy Department. "I have nothing to do," Lincoln said, "and have been to Stanton's and have now come over here. The fact is, I cannot keep still. I am so anxious to hear something about the Army." After asking Fox if he had any news, Lincoln commented, "Grant has got on a wall and kicked away the ladder. Like Cortez in Mexico, he has burnt his ships." Of course, Stanton, with the telegraph at the War Department, would have the latest news, not Fox at the Navy Department. Lincoln came to Fox, not for news, but once again for some positive companionship. A month and a half later, Lincoln took Fox on a visit to Grant, who was besieging Petersburg. Fox was good company, but also he was to arrange with Grant for his naval support. On the 20th of June, Lincoln and Fox, constituting a party of two, Fox proudly told Virginia, left Washington by steamer. They met with Grant the next day at City Point on the James River, then mounted horses and inspected Union lines at Petersburg, where the troops cheered the president, especially the colored ones, with much fervor. They spent the following day with Benjamin F. Butler and the Army of the James before returning to City Point for an hour's visit from General Grant, who assured them that he will surely win, even though he will have some rebuffs. Fox reported that with everything very satisfactory, Lincoln came back in fine spirits. Fox was also part of the group that accompanied the Lincoln family down the Potomac on the 30th of July to escape the heat and to see Grant. With them were James C. and Mercy Ann Conkling, Illinois friends, and it was, on the whole, a happy occasion, despite the failure of the 30 July assault following the mine explosion under Confederate lines at Petersburg. Neither Grant nor Lincoln, Fox reported, seemed cut down by that defeat or by the appalling casualties that summer, and remained confident that Petersburg and Richmond would fall. In a lighter vein, Fox reported to Virginia Fox, who was fond of Mary Lincoln, that with her old Springfield friend, she was for the time being divested of her cares of state, and I was surprised to find a good deal of fun in her. Each night, we all sat up until after 1 o'clock. Lincoln expected ultimate success at Petersburg and Richmond, but in the summer of 1864, his reelection was in jeopardy, and he needed immediate victories on the battlefields to win at the polls. Having failed for months to interest the War Department in a joint attack on Fort Fisher, which enabled the major blockade-running port of Wilmington, North Carolina, to remain open, Fox called on Lincoln to propose a move to help his election, which he took to very earnestly. Lincoln's support led to some preliminary planning, but Stanton, with whom Fox had a bout on 5th of October, and Grant did not commit troops to a Fisher expedition, and it stalled. Lincoln apparently lost some earnestness with Union victories elsewhere. Farragut in August at Mobile Bay, Sherman in September at Atlanta, Sheridan in October in the Shenandoah Valley. The election did indeed look better. On the evening of Election Day, 8th November 1864, Fox and Wells joined Lincoln and John Hay in the War Department Telegraph Office to await returns. Not relishing an evening with Stanton, with whom he had repeatedly clashed, Fox had been reluctant to go, but Stanton, who had been recently ill, remained at home. It was a delightful occasion because it soon became obvious that the election had gone pretty much one way. Fox was also elated because Congressman Alexander H. Rice, a friend of the Navy Department, was reelected, and because, as he exclaimed, "There are two fellows that have been especially malignant to us, and retribution has come upon them both, John P. Hale and Henry Winter Davis." Although he had ample reason, Lincoln did not rejoice at their defeats. "You have more of that feeling of personal resentment than I," he gently chided Fox. "Perhaps I may have too little of it, but I never thought it paid." Toward midnight, they had a nice oyster and coffee supper, with Fox amusing the convivial group by abusing the coffee for being too hot. Fox left between 1 and 2, convinced the nation had endorsed and elected Uncle Abe. "Great rejoicing over the election," Virginia reported. "Serenade and salute at the White House." After 2 a.m., Fox went over to hear the speeches and join the celebration. On Good Friday, 1865, while the Foxes were at Charleston for the flag-raising ceremony at Fort Sumter, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in Washington. The Foxes learned of the tragedy 3 days later at the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. As their vessel passed Mount Vernon on its way to Washington, Virginia Fox focused on the singular contributions of Washington Lincoln and prophesied that among past and future presidents, none will ever be more honored than they. Fox attended the funeral at the White House, and Virginia viewed the hour and a half procession with blacks at the end, led by James Wormley. Sharing their grief, Virginia exclaimed, "How my heart ached. What a friend Gus has lost." She was right. Lincoln's death affected Fox's post-war career. Fox's ambition for a diplomatic plum, like the ones his friends John Hay and John Nicolay received, would not be realized. Recognizing how close Fox was to his father, Robert Lincoln gave him a lock of Lincoln's hair. Associating 4 years with Lincoln, often under trying circumstances, had changed Fox. He remained personally fond of Montgomery Blair, but in politics, Fox had become a Lincoln man. The shift was apparent by late 1862, when he favored the Emancipation Proclamation in a spirited argument with Blair. That change in Fox, who 14 years earlier regarded Africans as subhuman, little, I'm quoting now, little removed from apes, was enormous. Along with Virginia, Fox remained friendlier to African-American aspirations than other members of the Blair and Woodbury clans. Fox's views stemmed from his close association with Lincoln. They were also influenced by his Christianity, stressing the great commandments to love God and his neighbors, and the crucial, and I think this may very well be the most important point, the crucial contribution of African-American enlistments to the undermanned Union Navy. By the way, that was an interesting post that was put up at the very beginning of this program of join the Navy. The reason why the Navy had to try to recruit people, why they didn't recruit, because the Army enlistments were subsidized by bonuses that enlistees were paid, and if you enlisted in the Navy, you didn't get any money because it didn't meet any quota. The quotas for Army enlistments, not for naval enlistments. At any rate, that's a little side issue. But it was the African American enlistments that desperately needed by the Navy, especially on the Mississippi River, but everywhere. With peace, the Union had to be reconstructed and the Navy reconstituted. Fox played a major role in recreating a peacetime Navy and had one official opportunity to express his views on Reconstruction and specifically on the political rights of African Americans. In late May 1865, acting as Navy Secretary while Gideon Welles is out of town, Fox attended President Andrew Johnson's cabinet meetings. At one of those meetings, Fox reported to Senator James W. Grimes, I, quote, had to oppose the president's proclamation for bringing North Carolina back into the Union because it does not give the black man a vote. I suppose my opinion is of no earthly moment to anyone but myself, he continued, but I was happy to give it because I believe it is right. Well, that's it on my little paper on Gus. Sure.
We welcome questions at this time if you have any. If you do, please go to the side microphones.
Well, I'm relying on my memory here, so I would appreciate your tolerance if I make a misstep. But going back to the beginning of your talk and the very beginning of the war, as a matter of fact, maybe you could talk about Fox's involvement in Fort Sumter, and also, as you also mentioned, tell us about the Powhatan, which, as I recall, it's kind of difficult because all the ships involved in the operation began with the letter P, but I believe it was the Powhatan, which was probably the most embarrassing incident in the early years of Lincoln's presidency. But also, was there any intention of carrying out the second part of Fox's plan regarding Fort Sumter, Powhatan or no?
Yes, two things there. One, the Powhatan was Fox regarded as very essential for his expedition. At the same time, William Henry Seward, along with Montgomery Meigs and is that pronounced Meigs? I never really quite know since I read it, the name. And David Dixon Porter were planning an expedition to reinforce Fort Pickens, and Seward passed some papers to Lincoln. Lincoln signed these papers, which would order the Powhatan to that particular expedition. So there are two expeditions going at the same time. It was being kept secret from Gideon Welles in the Navy Department, and therefore kept secret from Fox. And so Fox had no idea about the Powhatan being diverted. Now, finally, Welles did find out about this and confronted Seward about it, and he got Seward to countermand, and Lincoln as well. Lincoln got Seward to countermand the order, so that the Powhatan was supposed to go to Sumter. But Seward assigned his name to the order instead of Abraham Lincoln's name to the order. The order that David Dixon Porter had in his pocket, because he had, in the meantime, gone to New York, was signed by Abraham Lincoln. And when Porter was overtaken at the mouth of New York Harbor with Seward's order saying that he should not proceed to Pensacola, but should indeed turn command of the vessel over to the designated commander for the Sumter expedition, Porter refused to turn over the vessel because he said his orders from Lincoln superseded, even though they preceded, they nevertheless were more important than the order from Seward. That's typical Porter, by the way, who is. Porter's a tremendous admiral, a tremendously good organizer. Was very aggressive and was very a very useful naval commander. But as Lincoln recognized and Welles came to recognize, if Porter lacked character, he was known as Lying Dave, actually, and he succeeded very well. He made N.P. Banks the goat of the Red River campaign, although he was more responsible for its failure than anybody else, he meaning Porter. And he also made Benjamin F. Butler the goat of the first attempt on Fisher, even though Porter was not very did not do a very good job of blowing up the so-called powder vessel. Now that's part of your question. There was another part to it. Now I've babbled on so long. I've gone and forgotten what. There was another item that you.
I was wondering if I'm correct. The idea was to resupply Sumter and then to come in with guns blazing. But did Lincoln or anyone else have? Was that rather the second part of it? That was fairly faintly regarded, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah. The idea was to provision Sumter, and it was very carefully phrased. And actually, the message that went to the governor of South Carolina was that Fort Sumter was being provisioned, and if there was no resistance to provisioning, that would be it. If it was resisted, then they would throw in reinforcements and military supplies. But at this point, it was just food. Lincoln was obviously very wise in doing this, and as I mentioned in the paper, the fact that the South fired on bread, just simply fired on provisions, it really electrified the North and unified the North. And as Lincoln said in his letter to Fox, it basically it worked out very, very well. The results of the expedition. They couldn't have held on to Sumter anyhow. Not with the attitudes they had in April of 1861. By later on in the war, the Confederates held on to Sumter right to the very end. But that was that's when people really became very desperate about holding on to things, and they just dug into the rubble. Sumter was just converted into rubble, and as you remember probably from World War II, and that rubble makes better. You can defend rubble better than you can houses or a fort, for that matter.
Question. Yes. Say, a friend of mine who teaches at the Naval War College, Don Chisholm, has written a book called, it's the history of the U.S. Navy and through the eyes of the personnel department, and it's called Waiting to Fill Dead Men's Shoes, based on a letter that one of the frustrated naval people wrote about the inability to get promotions. And we read a lot about Lincoln's problems with his generals and with his with West Point, but how did Fox and Lincoln and Wells deal with this question of seniority as the basis of promotion and during the Civil War, and how did they come to get their Grants and Shermans, if you will, in the Navy?
Yeah, that's a very good point that you're bringing up. Seniority was just practiced to the detriment of the Navy prior to the Civil War, and Fox and Wells, and here they're a real team. Wells every bit as much as Fox in this, just simply ignored the seniority, and they gave Samuel Francis DuPont command of the Port Royal expedition. Despite the fact that he was many numbers down on the captain's list, and they made him head of the South Atlantic blockading squadron. Goldsborough, I think, was slightly higher than DuPont on the list, but he also was quite a ways down on the list, and gave him command of the North Atlantic blockading squadron. And indeed, Porter himself is a good example of this, and Fox is largely responsible for Porter's advance, but Porter was a lieutenant. Now, it's a Navy lieutenant, which is entirely different from an Army lieutenant, but he was nonetheless a Navy lieutenant, and he was just simply jumped up over people constantly because he was aggressive, because he was successful in battle. But seniority was both Fox and Wells just simply ended it, and they did appoint commissions to review, but again the people on the commission would tend to be kind, And the naval officers were not really that good at policing themselves, as it were, weeding out their own people. And then Fox actually complained about that only the really gross incompetents, the drunkards, of whom there were quite a few, by the way. The naval officers had a real alcohol problem. In fact, we lost a vessel, Gansford. I think he was somewhat related to Herman Melville. Was drunk in his vessel, Adirondack, I guess it was, ran aground in the Bahamas, and the only reason why I know that is because Fox didn't say what, but DuPont, a letter to his wife, said something to the effect, I hate to even think about how it happened or why it happened. It was quite obvious that he was drunk, and there were naval officers that they just had to remove from their vessels because they were constantly drunk.
Thank you, Dr. Hogenboom.
Thank you. I'll get my gear.